To restrict Russia's energy exports, the United States has put forward a new sanctions bill that plans to impose a 500% punitive tariff on any country that continues to purchase Russian oil and natural gas, with China and India as the main targets. Although this bill has not yet officially taken effect, some countries, worried about being sanctioned, have already chosen to suspend their energy dealings with Russia. China, however, has completely ignored the U.S. tariff threat and has gone ahead and bought more than $60 billion worth of oil and gas from Russia. Even more interestingly, after the U.S. raised this tariff threat, Russia started giving China a roughly 30% to 40% discount on its energy exports, allowing China to save at least $200 million in procurement costs. And up to now, the United States still hasn't dared to actually impose the 500% tariff sanctions on China. In today's video, we're going to look at two core questions. Why doesn't the U.S. dare to use tariff sanctions against China right now? And why is the oil that Russia sells to China so much cheaper than the oil it sells to other countries? If you like our video content, please click to subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can receive all our latest video content. Now, let's get into today's topic. Since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict in 2022, Western countries have concentrated their efforts on weakening Russia's ability to fund the war through energy exports. The most damaging measures have been the oil embargo and price cap mechanism imposed on Russian oil by the European Union together with the G7 countries. Starting in December that year, the EU and the UK banned seaborne imports of Russian crude oil. At the same time, the G7 set a price cap of $60 per barrel. Any shipment of Russian oil that uses shipping, insurance, or financial services provided by EU or G7 member states must be traded below that cap. Otherwise, it is considered a violation. In the natural gas sector, the focus has been on the Nord Stream 2 project. Although the pipeline had already been completed, Germany halted the certification process at the final stage. Under the original plan, it would have doubled Russia's capacity to supply gas directly to Germany. Later, in September 2022, multiple undersea lines of Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 were hit by explosions and suffered severe leaks, leaving the pipelines almost completely out of operation. European countries were forced to turn to liquefied natural gas imports from places like Norway and the United States. For Russia, its previously stable long-term export market was destroyed, and its ability to use natural gas as a geopolitical bargaining chip was systematically weakened. After losing the European and American energy markets, Russia quickly shifted the focus of its exports to two new main buyers, China and India. As far as I know, in 2023, China imported around 2.1 million barrels of crude oil from Russia per day, adding up to nearly 780 million barrels over the year. Just this oil alone brought Russia roughly $50 to $60 billion in revenue. If we also include the natural gas imported through pipelines and LNG, a conservative estimate is that China spent around $70 billion on Russian oil and gas in 2023. You could say China has firmly become one of Russia's largest single energy buyers. As for India, before the Russia-Ukraine conflict broke out, it had hardly used any Russian oil at all. But by 2023, India's imports had quickly risen to around 1.6 million barrels per day, instantly pushing Russia up to become India's largest crude supplier. So in 2023 alone, these two populous countries, China and India, paid more than $100 billion for Russian oil and gas, allowing Russia to temporarily withstand the pressure of Western sanctions. However, we also know that as Trump came back to office this year, he clearly stated that he would push to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In order to pull Russia back to the negotiating table, the United States in April this year sent out a strong signal of secondary sanctions, preparing to impose punitive tariffs of up to 500% on those countries that are still buying large amounts of Russian oil, natural gas, and uranium, and other energy products. This figure is not an exaggerated claim by the media, because some American think tanks and lawmakers have even called it bone fracture sanctions and believe this is an unprecedentedly tough stance. By June 2025, this bill had already obtained joint support from more than 80 senators. Although it has not yet been formally passed to become law and has not yet taken immediate effect, Trump himself has already repeatedly stated in public that any country that continues to do business with Russia will face severe sanctions. So afterwards, some countries, out of concern, began to suspend or reduce their energy trade with Russia. As far as I know, the Czech Republic is a very typical example. In the past, about half of their crude oil depended on Russia. But in April 2025, the Czech Republic announced that it would completely stop using Russian oil and instead rely entirely on the TEL pipeline that starts from ports in Italy. This pipeline has an annual transport capacity of 8 million tons, enough to let the Czech Republic completely get rid of its dependence on Russian crude oil. And in November this year, several of Turkey's largest refineries also reduced their imports of Russian oil and instead bought more oil grades from countries such as Iraq, Kazakhstan, and even Brazil. And their reason is also very direct. In order to avoid a new round of Western sanctions and the secondary sanctions mechanism that may take effect at any time. However, the most obvious contrast has to be India. This country was once obsessed with cheap Russian crude oil, but now the situation has changed sharply. Because starting from August this year, the United States imposed an additional 25% punitive tariff on some Indian goods, raising the total tariff level to 50%. And the reason for raising tariffs is precisely India's continued large-scale purchases of Russian oil. Up to now, Reliance, India's largest private refinery, as well as many Indian state-owned refineries, have begun to largely suspend direct transactions with sanctioned Russian oil companies. In just a few months, seaborne shipments of Russian crude oil heading to India have fallen by about 2/3. But in the face of the so-called 500% tariff threat from the United States, China is not afraid at all, and instead has been frantically importing oil and gas products from Russia with a total value of about $60 billion. So what exactly is going on here? In fact, since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, China has all along been supporting Russia in the background through importing energy. Data show that in 2024, China imported more than 100 million tons of crude oil from Russia, accounting for 19.6% of China's total crude oil imports. And natural gas imported via pipelines accounted for as high as 39.1%. At the same time, the two sides are also actively pushing forward the Power of Siberia 2 project, planning to raise the annual gas supply to China to 100 billion cubic meters in the future, which is almost equal to 1/4 of China's annual natural gas consumption. Although since 2025 the United States has repeatedly threatened to impose punitive tariffs of up to 500% on buyers of Russian energy trade between China and Russia has not been substantially affected. According to official data, from January to August 2025, the total value of energy trade between China and Russia has already exceeded $60 billion, of which oil accounted for $45 billion, and natural gas trade was about $16 billion, a year-on-year increase of 28.3%. By September this year, China's crude oil imports from Russia reached 8.3 million tons, with a total value of more than $4 billion, setting a new historical record. Interestingly, after the United States kept stepping up sanctions, the Russian energy company Novatek chose to voluntarily cut prices in order to ensure that its restricted Arctic LNG 2 project could still continue to ship abroad. As far as I know, starting from August this year, Novatek has cut the export price of natural gas for Chinese buyers by 30% to 40%. For example, if one cargo of LNG has a theoretical price of $44 million on the Asian spot market, the price when it is sold to China now is only around $30 million. And from August until now, 14 cargoes of liquefied natural gas from Arctic LNG 2 have already arrived at China's Beihai receiving terminal, and all of them were sold at this kind of deep discount. In just a few months, China has saved at least $200 million through this wave of purchases. Although this is a loss-making deal, from the Kremlin's point of view, in this sensitive stage when Russia is being encircled and is most worried about being hit by secondary sanctions, those countries that are still willing to take delivery are the real partners. You may also be curious, why is China not worried at all about the sanction threats released by the United States? As far as I know, starting from February this year, the United States, on the grounds of the fentanyl crisis and reciprocal tariffs, uniformly imposed about 10% additional tariffs on Chinese export goods. Immediately afterward, in March, the tariff rate on some categories was further raised to 20%, and adding this on top of the original Section 301 tariffs, the combined tariff rate on certain sensitive products was once pushed up to a historical high of 125%. However, by November, after the Busan summit and several rounds of China-U.S. negotiations, the White House finally pushed the so-called IEEPA reciprocal tariffs on China back down from the high level to around 10%, while at the same time cutting the fentanyl tariffs from 20% to 10%. The reason why the United States suddenly shifted course on tariffs has a key factor in the pressure from the agricultural and energy sectors. Because after the United States raised tariffs, China retaliatorily imposed high tariffs on U.S. soybeans, causing U.S. soybeans to be almost unsellable in the Chinese market. In the first half of this year, political pressure in America's agricultural states and among farmers kept rising. It was not until the China-U.S. Economic and Trade Agreement in early November that China committed to additionally purchasing at least 12 million tons of U.S. soybeans in the last 2 months of 2025, and to purchasing no less than 25 million tons every year between 2026 and 2028. This outcome was hard-won, and of course the United States also does not wish to see the results of more than half a year of talks destroyed in one stroke. At the same time, the U.S. energy sector has also been actively promoting American oil and gas. In public speeches, Trump has repeatedly emphasized that China has already agreed to start purchasing American energy, including possible large oil and gas projects from Alaska. For Washington, these energy orders can both stabilize domestic votes and be used as bargaining chips to persuade China to reduce its purchases of Russian energy. So it is simply impossible for the United States, just because of the Russia issue, to once again push the just ease China-U.S. economic and trade relationship toward breakdown. And what is important is that no matter how the U.S. side raises tariffs, China can completely respond by restricting rare earth exports. If the United States, because of the Russian energy issue, turns around and sanctions China, this will almost inevitably trigger a new round of China-U.S. trade conflict. The Chinese side will very likely retaliate by restricting rare earths and raising tariffs on agricultural products, once again impacting the U.S. market. This kind of lose risk is unfavorable to anyone. But in any case, under U.S. sanctions, China has obtained cheaper Russian energy resources and has further deepened its cooperative relationship with Russia. This situation is clearly not what the United States wants to see, but it is also unable to change this situation. So what do you think? To not miss out on our future projects and news updates, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We will continue to provide you with more exciting and interesting content.